We are here to talk about modern design techniques for Drupal. My name is Tim Broeker. I am the co-founder and technical director of a local design and development shop, Drupal shop here in Minneapolis. I am not a designer, I'm a technical director. However, a lot of our clients often come to us asking for some of the, in fact, we had one recently who could only describe it as swoopy and flowy and parallax scrolling basically, and that can be a hard thing to pull off in Drupal. So we set about trying to find a reliable, reasonable way to pull off some of those techniques in Drupal. So the first question is probably, what is modern design? I'm sure everyone has different opinions. Again, I'm not a designer, but it seems to be these days that these are sort of the big trends out there. Make it big, giant hero images, full screen, scrolling images, minimizing, taking away UI elements, cleaner pages, tiles and flat design. That seems to be a big thing that sort of goes in well with these in terms of large scrolling sites. Media embeds is another trend. And finally, the big one, the parallax effect. Now, I was talking to David Needham the other night about this presentation and what is modern design, and he asked whether parallax was already dead, and I said the bigger question might be, is web design dead? I mean, what is there left to do? Obviously, there are going to be advances, but in here we are in 2015, a lot has been done, including the parallax effect. So rather than debate whether or not design is dead and the parallax scroll is dead, we decided that we would build the tools to allow our designers to do so. So the parallax effect started, sort of the first real big popular culture reference to it was Steamboat Willie in 1928, when animators discovered that if you had a moving background against a static image, it gave the illusion of depth and movement, immersion, and so on. It then, was obviously continued to be very popular in animation. The video game industry picked it up. If you think of games like Super Mario Brothers, Pitfall with the scrolling backgrounds, that's effectively what it is. Then in roughly early 2010, I couldn't find an exact reference. Some random designers said, hey, what if we could do this with websites? 2 or more, usually divs, moving at different speeds, animated with JavaScript. People started playing around with it and came up with some pretty cool looking effects back in the day. And then it sort of continued on. If you do old searches, you'll find various people with small hacks. Then in late 2010, Nike released a site called Better World. It was a marketing site, and it was spectacular. It's now down. You can't go see it. But it really took the design world by storm, and there were dozens of articles about it, and everyone said, oh my God, how did they do that? And then it sort of, it started to become more of a trend over the years, and then in 2012, the New York Times published an article called Snowflake, and I'm going to pull it up here. Snowfall, sorry. It's not going to translate too well on the screen. When this article was published, there were dozens of articles about how this was going to change the face of journalism, and everyone was so sort of blown away by this concept. So I'm just going to briefly scroll through it. What we have here is a giant background image. It's lightly animated. And as we continue down, we go into our article text. We've got an embedded video. And again, it's not translating very well on the big screen, but animated video maps. And when you look at it today, 4 or 3 years later, it doesn't look that spectacular. But at the time, no one had ever seen anything like this. And everyone wondered, again, how did they do it? In particular, the design blogs went sort of crazy over this site. However, this is a quote from one of those articles in December 2012 by Andrew Kuhneman, who was the lead developer and designer on this project. First of all, this project took them over 3 months to put together. It involved designers, developers, of course, videographers and writers. But in this article in The Wire, this story was not produced in our normal CMS, which is probably pretty obvious. And to me, as a developer, it was pretty obvious that this was not produced in the New York Times CMS. Breaking out of that, we are able to do a lot more. And so since that date, when we've had clients come to this, that's sort of been our answer. This is a very difficult problem to solve in a CMS that's putting out structured data in a way that isn't necessarily suited to finely tweaking things and stacking content and pictures on top of each other. Which is partly why it's so scary. First of all, it's a very complex concept as a front-end web designer or developer. When you start thinking about putting divs in motion based on screen position, it's just something that, at least for me, initially was very hard to wrap my head around. There are several missing pieces, in particular in Drupal and probably in all or most CMSs. How do you attach giant background images to a node without it rendering on the page and having it work as the background? How do you stack nodes together in a single page layout? It's also custom and expensive. We do have clients in the past who have asked for this, and we build it for them, and it's usually a hard-coded solution, or maybe it's the one big image on their home page, or maybe it's a landing page that we custom design, and it's not a sustainable model, which leads to the human problems. How do you put these tools into the hands of both your design team and ideally with your clients so that anybody can create these sort of beautiful, large, gorgeous landing pages? So in Drupal, of course, the Snowfall article was 2012. We're now 3 years later. People have obviously tried to solve this problem. The first approach, there's two modules, Parallax Background and Parallax Toolkit. They're slightly different. And the thing in common with all of these solutions is that there are some limitations. Parallax Background lets you write a single jQuery snippet that lets you target a single, or maybe if it's a complex regex, several divs. Again, very limited. Allows you to maybe do your home page or a certain element of a certain page, and you're still involving a developer-type person to write that jQuery. Parallax Toolkit is an interesting Drupal module. It brings the parallax effect to the standard Drupal block system, meaning a user could place a block and an image and some text, and this module will wire it together and introduce a very simple parallax scrolling effect. The other big thing you'll see is the theme layer. There are dozens of third-party paid themes out there advertised as responsive parallax Drupal themes, and you go look at them and they're great. They're beautiful, gorgeous scrolling home pages, but they are sort of gimmicks in that they typically provide you with a single settings form with 7, 8, 9 predefined regions where you're allowed to put in your content. That's probably your home page. That's it. Sometimes some of them also integrate a single header on pages. But again, very limited. It's theme dependent, content dependent, in that they are defining where these effects are going to happen for you. Custom hats. This is sort of what we've done to date. And in fact, researching this, I found a Drupal module called Empty Page, which literally its whole job in life is to provide you with an empty page where you can then go hard code these effects. No fun. The paragraphs module. This is an interesting one, and if anyone's interested in this topic in general, I'd recommend looking at it. They have developed a whole ecosystem of modules that allow you to do things like embed videos as a paragraph right into your body, sort of an interesting paradigm that's somewhat new, but they seem to have a lot of progress. They have a module called Entity Background that's tied directly to the paragraphs module, and they're sort of required to work together. And again, it's great and it works, but it's somewhat limited in that A, you're married to the paragraphs ecosystem, and B, you're limited to stacking them together in the way that paragraphs works. Finally, there are two modules, one called Single Page Site and one called Single Page Website. They were my sort of first inspiration when I started looking at this. I think it is Single Page Site in particular that it's theme independent. It takes over your main menu and builds a nice menu that allows you to stack nodes together, click a button, and have a nice scrolling effect down to wherever you're clicking. It's great. However, no parallax, limited to your main menu, meaning you can do this once on your site. It can be your home page or a landing page, very limited. And finally, the single page website module, even more limited in that it is tied directly to Bartik. And if you don't use Bartik, you do not get to use single page website. And again, no parallax. It's just a fairly old module designed to help solve some of these problems. So that's sort of what people are doing today to bring these to Drupal. So we found what we think is a better way, which we will be demoing shortly here. So I see a typo, my word flexible is spelled wrong, but in any case, it is very flexible in terms of theme independence. What I'm about to show you does not depend on your theme. I use the phrase freedom to theme, meaning not only is it not dependent on your theme, but the techniques we're going to show you can be integrated into any other Drupal site, meaning you can have a series of landing pages, a series of regular news stories, etc. Freedom to code. It is not, in my opinion, dependent on any one layout engine, but as we'll get to, you do need some type of layout engine to do your markup. What we will be showing you is based on panels and Panelizer, which is a great way to do that. This exact same technique could very likely be handled with Display Suite, hand-coded templates, but you do need some engine to drive your template markup, because that's how a lot of this works, which we will get to. And finally, we've built something that we think is human-friendly, meaning I can both turn it over to our design team and say, here is this framework that you can use to build these types of pages, mini sites, landing pages, beautiful node detail pages. Beyond that, it's something we can hand to our clients and say, hey, if you want to build a gorgeous single-page landing site or a single-page site or what have you, you now have the power to do so. With that, what do we need to do this? So this was all new to me. Because again, I'm not a designer. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about design, but it turns out it's actually sort of a technical problem that you need all these pieces, some of which are missing from Drupal, in order to get it to be a design problem. So we're now at the point where this is a design problem, and designers will then start to make this look better. But the first thing you need is a Parallax framework. And by that, I mean a JavaScript library that is going to do the heavy lifting for you to actually animate your divs, to do the sliding backgrounds. We chose the Scroller library, that's S-K-R-O-L-L-X, and by the way, I will be adding a long list of links to the presentation page after the session. The two big ones seem to be Scroller and Scroll Magic. They both have a lot of community behind them. However, Scroller is much simpler to learn, a little bit more limited. Scroll Magic is a much more complex beast. So for our purposes, we started with Scroller. I have no doubt that this same technique would work with any good Parallax framework. You need a preloader. Often you're stacking 6, 7 giant images on top of each other, and if you don't have a preloader, all your text is going to get jumbled up at the top of the screen waiting for these images to load. Actually, there seems to be, among the other modern design trends, a new trend seems to be interesting looking preloaders versus little gears spinning. People, if you remember back in the days of Flash and some of the other things that needed to load, people would put some time into building interesting animations for their preloaders. That seems to be coming back now too, in that a lot of these sites are loading with preloaders. You've probably seen it a lot more lately with little gears spinning as you're waiting for things to load. So we used a JavaScript called images preload.js. Very easy to integrate into Drupal. You need a method to attach CSS backgrounds to entities or nodes. Typically, so the old way, of course, you would define it in your CSS and you would have to know the node ID, and the client could never do it because your developer or your CSS person would have to map directly to a node. When you attach an image to a node in Drupal, of course, its job is to display on the page, not to sit nicely as a CSS background. So this is one of the missing pieces, in fact, in Drupal. So we spent some time looking for what others had done. There are several background-related modules out there that attempt to do this, I think 4 or 5. The one we found that was closest to what we needed is called the background field module, and it literally defines a field formatter for a standard image field that will render it as, it'll write a small snippet of CSS directly to your page up in your header. It won't display the image, and it will tie that background image to your div. Now, there was one major issue with the background module, and that is that it had no concept of entities or the entity ID of what you were targeting. Its job was to do a single background on a single page with no notion of anything else. So we did have to make in fact, we've now rewritten it. We have a module built to do this, but there's a one-line patch that you can do to the background field module that basically tacks the entity ID onto the end of that CSS so that when you're stacking your nodes, it will know which is the appropriate background to show. So that's one of the missing pieces. We're actually working to release a module to do that for you. A method to group nodes. If you have a long scrolling site, of course, that's typically going to be made up of multiple nodes stacked together. If you are a Drupal developer, you'll probably be familiar with views and entity reference, a very handy way to refer nodes to a parent node and show them in a list. And again, we'll show how that works in a bit. And finally, you need a display engine for your template code and layouts. And by that I mean all of these Parallax libraries rely directly on code coming out of your templates. This is a beginner session, so I'm not going to go into code, but there are things like data top equals 300, meaning, okay, start this slide 300 pixels from the top. Again, they've done all the heavy lifting. You almost don't need to, you do need to experiment to get your effects right, but there's 1,000 tutorials out there to do it. But the key is that markup needs to be in your divs as they are output to Drupal. So again, we chose panels and panelizer because that is sort of our core ecosystem as a company. That's what we build virtually everything in, so it was a very natural choice for us. It would be very possible, again, to do this with Display Suite, custom templates, or any number of other template methods. Okay, I've already sort of covered some of this, so I won't go over all of it again. But again, CTools, of course, is a requirement of panels and panelizer. The last two I did not cover. User-friendly tools. Again, the goal is to let regular users do this without having to monkey around going through a nightmare of a scenario just trying to create a simple landing page. So we have a very simple version of that for this demo and a somewhat more complex one we're working on that is sort of a views-based interface to allow users to work with these nodes. And the last piece, and I was joking that this session could have easily been advanced coder session or beginners site building, or it was very hard to categorize because there are so many pieces. One of the last pieces we do use is a small, what we call a glue module to tie a few of these pieces together. It frankly doesn't do much, but it does do a few important things that I'll cover once we get into the demo. So, time for school. We're going to go right into the demo now. If anyone has any questions before I do, feel free to shout them out. Bear with me here. Okay. What you're looking at here is a single Drupal node with two fields. A title. We had a little title field called subheader, and I'm sorry, three fields. The background image field. That's all it is. It's a single Drupal node. And by the way, you'll have to bear with me. Last night I did a quick CSS. These are supposed to be flush, as you'll see throughout this presentation, and I didn't want to break anything else, so I left it. The first effect, this is the first effect I finally figured out how to do in Drupal. It's a simple scroll. As I am scrolling up, my two fields are rising up with it over the image, and it's going away. When I figured this out, I'm 46 years old. I discovered that I still can find joy in solving problems because I was dancing around when I finally got that first effect working because I didn't understand scroller. I didn't understand how Drupal was going to put this together, so that was our sort of first piece. Then we started playing with other effects. Now on this one, as I scroll, you'll see we have no text. The same exact two fields. This is another Drupal node that's been stacked on top of that first node with the same two fields. In this case, the text is fixed at 206 pixels from the top of this image. And as I continue to scroll, if you watch the scooter, it's going to shoot 400 pixels to the left. Another Drupal node. This is sort of the standard one that I've sort of settled on as my sort of go-to default favorite. Another giant hero image, and as I scroll it towards the top, the fields are going to fade out very gently. And this one is probably my favorite effect. Here we have three different divs, four if you include the fields. We have a curtain coming down over our image. As we get to the bottom, my 2 fields are going to pop up. And those are the 4 sort of effects we've built so far. Again, this is all dependent on the Parallax library that you end up choosing, what effects are available. There are a gazillion different options, zooming in on an image, zooming back on an image, blurring an image. There's a lot you can do with this. So that's pretty cool, we thought. But it starts to get really interesting, I think. When you start adding other fields. So if you, so many sites now do this. Medium.com and Squarespace now has a big tool to build these types of sites, and a lot of people are starting to use them as no detail pages, beautiful articles with a giant hero image. So as I scroll down here, we have now we've added a 4th field to our display. We have the headline, subheader, our background image. Now we're using our body field. And again, we've now stacked a similar set of nodes together using all 4 of those effects that I just showed you, but this time we have our body field in play, and it allows you to build exactly what you see here. Big landing pages, no detail pages, beautiful article pages, full mini sites. In other words, you could segment your normal Drupal site and build a small single page mini site. Or a lot of people these days, especially if you're doing a quick one-off project or a marketing type thing, a lot of people, their whole sites are a single page website. So that's all there is to it. This tool allows you to do all of those things. So that was sort of the basics. Now we use, again, panels and Panelizer. One of the interesting things is that because of the way these layouts are constructed, so we just use a large single column layout for our body. That could easily be a 3x3 grid. It could easily be 2 columns with a single column footer, where our content creators are able to drop things in there. So what I'm going to do quickly is log into the site and show you some of the, whoops. Okay, I also want to just quickly demonstrate that this is in fact just a normal old regular Drupal site. This is a normal basic page that has no scrolling. It's in my main menu. It could just as easily be a news section or what have you. So in this case, however, I am going to refresh here, get back into presentation mode. Okay. So, looks like we're a little cut off here. I don't know if it's been, has it been the way the whole time where I've been cut off? Yeah. Okay. It probably wasn't as noticeable before, so I don't know how to fix that.
Look at the overscan. Look at the overscan in preferences.
What's that?
Look at the overscan in preferences for the Mac.
In your display.
Look at the system preferences. Look at display. Look at the overscan.
Overscan.
Underscan. Put it to more. Put it to the right. So you get
Oh, yeah.
Right. Go to the right.
About halfway.
That looks like as good as we're going to get. Okay, in any case, we'll get the point here. These are all the nodes that you saw. We have one node type called a one-page container. We have 2 of them in the site. The sole job of that container is to hold the child nodes that are going to get stacked underneath it. Or I should say originally that was the point. Since we've continued building this, I'm going to go back to this page. Actually, I'm going to go back. So what we have here is the, again, sorry you can't see this. This is our entity reference field where we are able to quickly add references to those scrolling nodes and drag them in the order that we want. So our editors, content editors, have a very easy way to both add these nodes to a container in any order they want, They can also, of course, add new nodes to the system. And then we decided it might be cool to have, so often on these single page sites you'll have a menu that allows you to jump quickly down to any one of those sections. So we built a separate little tool here that allows you to add a menu to any one of these pages. So I'm going to quickly enable it and show it to you. And if we go back here, you can now see that I have this menu that will bring me to the pages. We quickly discovered that, so all of these single page scrolling things are typically done with an anchor tag that will take you down to where you want to go. With a lot of these techniques, you have no idea where you want to go because an anchor tag sits at the top of the div, and if you click the anchor, you'll shoot, to some horrible place like this, and that's not your intent. So we discovered a scroller plugin called Scroller Menus that allows you to target exactly where you want to go on the screen. So if I click as seen on TV, see I got it slightly wrong. I think that's because I'm logged in with my admin tools. I actually have a Chrome plugin that allows me to find exactly the pixel level of where this screen starts to help facilitate that. If I do this one, again, I was slightly off. It should have stopped right there. But it's a very workable technique for, and this really brings the concept of a mini site or a landing page to the forefront when you can start adding menus to these and then jumping to other pages of your site that work well. So a few other things of note. Of course, I'll use this one. So they work in containers or they can work as single nodes. In this case, I just pulled up a single one-page node. It's part of a container, but it can also stand alone, meaning this could be designed as your default display for, hey, how are we going to show news articles? A giant hero image, a beautiful headline, a beautiful effect, and then get right down into our article. I'm going to quickly do this for you because this gets pretty cool. What you're seeing now is this. If you haven't seen this before, you might be wondering what's going on. This is Panels and Panelizer. It's Panels IPE, which is in-place editor, and it allows you to customize both your page content and your page layout in a sort of cool drag and drop interface. This is built into every site we build these days, and so naturally it was built into this tool. But what it allows your users to do is, so again, we're in this, still in this Parallax scrolling node page. I'm going to click add. I'll go ahead and add a map. Let's see if this works. TC Drupal camp. And there it is. I'm going to save it. I've just embedded a map into my one page. Very nice. Now that, when I go back to my container where this is, that will of course be part of the content. So now if you start to wrap your head around the fact that editors can A, build these beautiful pages, B, stack them up together in a single page format, and C, interact directly with both their content and their layouts, you can see how this starts to become a pretty darn powerful method of building these pages. Again, for the purposes of the demo, we kept it simple with a single page, but this could be a very nice grid layout. The tool I just showed you also integrates with things like views, so that if you want to, on your single page website, show 5 news items from another part of your website in your scrolling page, it's very easy to do that kind of thing. Back here. There's the map that we embedded, so we can see it now back as part of a parent container. So again, back to a normal Drupal site. Now earlier I referenced that this was theme independent. I'm going to show you that. So the theme you were just looking at was just a bare bones, it's our base theme. We didn't put anything on it. It was just sort of a blank slate. I hope this works. I haven't checked this in a while, but I'm going to switch to Bartik to see what happens. Okay, Bartik is now our default theme, we're going to go back to our site. We have a normal looking Bartek page. We'll go back to our one-page landing page and see what happens. There it is, with our menu intact, all of the scrolling effects intact. Of course, it doesn't look as nice. You'd have to actually do your theming to make sure this looks nice. But it is utterly independent of what your wrapper theme is and where it is in your layout. This whole view, again, this is a view of stacking these nodes, could be placed in a sidebar. It doesn't have to take over your whole site. It's a very flexible way of doing it. So again, framework independent. You just need the markup, whether it's panels, display suite. Human independent. Regular users can and should be able to create these types of pages in Drupal. And theme independent. Designers should not be locked down by a jQuery snippet that they need to target to do one cool little thing. This really lets them. So let me back up. By default, we kept it very simple by default. You can see we've got a white headline. I've purposely chosen some darker backgrounds. Every image, its whole job is to take up 100% of the viewport. That's sort of out of the box. However, because each one of these stacked entities has an ID, slide -6, for example, it's very easy after this point for your designers and design team to really take over this, especially when it's on that single page scroll with multiple nodes stacked. One might be, if you remember the snowfall article from the New York Times, they had one image that was only maybe a quarter of the viewport, the next one was the full viewport. It's very easy to target individual images. Another tool that Panels provides is the ability to put styles on those fields that I showed you. So when I clicked customize this page, I'll go quickly back to one to give you a working example. I want to make sure we leave enough time for a few questions. Okay, so I'll go back to this particular node. So this little tool, and again, other frameworks I'm guessing have similar things, maybe not quite as cool, but that little paintbrush allows me to pull up a style box. I don't have any nicely defined faded styles for this particular demo, but it's very easy to create one. What this tool does is you choose your option. On the demo we have that does have this working, we have one called Fade Dark, one called Fade Light. It'll add a class, a CSS class, directly to the div that's putting out this headline or this summary. And then in your theme will be CSS to handle that. So if you are worried about content editors putting text, unreadable text, which is very common in this technique, it's tricky to get your text lined up. So one solution is to put a nicely faded black background behind it where the text shows out regardless of the background image. And that is, of course, independent to each pane that you've added to your node. This one could be in a nice shaded box. This one could be a giant white banner headline. So again, very flexible in terms of allowing regular users to make these kinds of changes without having to monkey around in CSS or anything else. And lastly, before I leave this screen, of course, right now this particular layout is also stacked in a single column. It would be just as easy in our panels template to do a grid here. In fact, we have other examples where we put the headline up in the upper left. We've got a column running down here with, say, a sidebar or a call to action button and maybe a small embedded video. But again, for the purposes of this session, we sort of wanted to strip it all back to show the general principles of how it works. I'm going to quickly switch back to our old theme. Okay, with that, I'm going to jump quickly back for a last slide before we do some questions. Problems and issues. So there are a number of them, and in fact, I probably have a few more I can add here that I didn't get into my slide. So performance. What you're doing here is stacking 6, 7, 8 giant nodes on top of each other, each with a giant image. That's a lot of work for both Drupal to do and for your browser to do in terms of getting all that offload it onto the server onto your computer. Frankly, we haven't launched any live sites with this yet. We're working on it now. However, we've launched plenty of sites that use views to stack nodes, in my opinion, as long as you're using heavy caching and that you don't have a weather.com type of site where you're worrying about 1 million page views a day, that the performance issue is something that can be solved, especially if you're somewhat judicious in using some of these techniques. SEO, a lot of people complain about these single page sites because your keywords are now all stacked together on a single page, and as you know, Google's algorithms will look towards the top of the page to find out what's most important. So a lot of, it's sort of a love-hate relationship with marketers in that they love these beautiful, gorgeous looking pages, but they do have some SEO problems. I don't have an answer for it, other than that I personally don't typically care too much about SEO. Responsive. None of the stuff that I just showed you today is technically responsive. There's a number of issues that need to be worked out on our end for that, and as a larger design community, a lot of people are working on it. There is a scroller plugin that purports to do this very, very well. There's other techniques where instead of doing the scroll, you'll resize the image, drop the headline down below, but regardless, despite the fact that it looks like it should be perfectly responsive and awesome on a mobile device, it's not out of the box. It does require some work, and that's where, again, now the design team comes in, and a lot of this is now their problem in that they now have a technical architecture to work with. And finally, is it overkill? Earlier I said, is modern design dead? I have no idea. It's very easy to build horrible looking pages with these techniques. But I hope, as I just showed you, it's also very simple with these tools and sort of these glue modules tying it all together for regular people to do it without messing up too badly. I just sort of threw the pages I showed you today together. A true designer could probably make those look pretty nice. But you would have to, watch the tendency of having a full site filled with, it drives some people crazy, frankly. But it is a great technique, and we are very happy that we have it working in Drupal for both us and for our clients. So with that, questions?
Is the setup that you use limited to background images or for the hero image, or can you use video yet? I guess is my question.
I don't know the answer to that. We haven't tried it. We can very easily embed video into the node, of course, but whether you can use video as the actual background, I don't know. Does anyone know? I don't know the answer to that. I know I've seen plenty of people use large animated backgrounds that aren't necessarily like, say, a YouTube video or an actual video, but my hunch is that if there is a way to do it in the design world, that there's a way to do it using this technique by altering the markup.
You can do it.
Okay. That's Dan, our design director. Any other questions?
Try it going the other way. Not this way.
It's that's funny because that was the very first question. So I worked my butt off getting this to the point where it is, and the very first question our project manager asked was, "Can it go sideways?" Like, well, so the answer to that is probably not using the library I chose, which is Scroller. Scroll Magic, however, which again is much more complex, does have built-in horizontal scrolling capabilities, so maybe that's something we'll look at in the future. Yeah.
How long did it take? How long did the process go through?
Technically 17 years. but no, in reality, it wasn't that bad. For me, the first piece to get my head around was, how does this actually work? This, again, it's so complex that you've got these stacked divs that are all moving differently. So I probably took a full day to download, and again, I'll have some links to these tutorials on the project page after the session. I downloaded a few tutorials. I played around with some things. I really tried to understand it in a flat index.html page with no server, no Drupal, no nothing, just figuring out how it worked. So that was probably a day. then I started thinking, okay, now how can we do this in Drupal? And frankly, for us at least, we already had a lot of the key pieces in place with panels and panelizer and entity reference and views, and we're already used to stacking nodes that way. So that probably took a day to work out, and then many days of sort of fine-tuning and figuring out the best way to do it, and building in that menu system that I showed you that allows you to, with a click of a button, add the nice menus that bring you down to where you want to go. So it's been, I'd say a good week full-time, and then many weeks of just sort of playing with it and getting it ready. It's now at the point where we are comfortable, and in fact, we are using it for our first client site coming up. So we feel like it's sort of a rock-solid way of doing this at this point. All right, well, thank you very much.